Well, everyone, we are joined today by Chris Calderone of Centracare, who is going to talk about grief and loss. And I will turn it over to you, Chris. Thanks so much for being here.
Glad to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I am going to share it right away. Let's see if I can get that up and running. And we will start from the beginning. So it is good to be with you today. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to share a bit of some of what I've experienced in this realm and to hear what you have experienced and allow you an opportunity to explore this topic during this time. So my name is Chris Calderone. I am a chaplain with Centracare Home Care and Hospice here in central Minnesota. I say that because we're based in St. Cloud, but our hospice territory is it's a whole lot of territory around here. So I drive around to various places and homes and centers to journey with people spiritually on this journey. It includes palliative care and home care as well. So a note about that, I just put this in here from the lens that I view this from and a bit of the lens of where we're looking at grief and loss from. You know, spiritual care encompasses a lot, and it's about being with you on your beliefs, your truth, your experience. That can include religion. It can include a whole lot of things under the umbrella of spirituality. So this is really the soul's journey, so to speak, and that's what we look for in spiritual care. And as you can see, loss is definitely part of that, and grief and how we encounter those and how we journey through those. Here's a very easy overview of what we're going to do. We're going to talk about grief, loss of the assumptive world, anticipatory grief, ambiguous loss. You get the idea that there's many different kinds. And by the time we get to the bottom of this list, we're going to see how they all come together, especially in the experience of ALS. And that, of course, is where I would turn to you as the experts of your own experience and how you move through the motions of grief and loss and process that. So we'll dive in right away. The overview of grief is most commonly, I would say, from Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. You've heard of stages of grief. And it was told to me, and it was told to a lot of people, that this is linear. You know, first you have to have denial, then you gotta be angry, then you have to bargain, then be depressed, and then have acceptance. We've learned since then, and perhaps you know, this is not linear. This is not a linear model at all. All of these things can be true at the same time. They can be true one day to the next. Of note at the bottom there, and hello to the person who just joined us. Thank you for being here. You didn't miss much. We're just getting started with the first topic on the overview of grief. And with that, David Kessler, in one of his books, talks about a new stage of grief in this 5 model. We're going to go to 6 and throw meaning making in there. And consider that not linear as well. So as you think about those, maybe not what stage am I at, but what might be present today? That might be a way to approach a grief and a brief overview of that. There's a difference between grief and mourning. And I believe that Alan Wofelt really says that well. You know, grief is the feeling of grief. Mourning is the expression of grief. And I think that's going to be an important piece for us as we look at grief and loss. You know, it's what are we experiencing and how do we actually do the work of grieving? So you can see some examples of what grief might feel like and what mourning might look like. So we have those two to work with. And this is our first pause point. There's discussion for those of us present here, but for those who are watching the recording, here's a pause moment. And maybe pause and ask yourselves these questions. What are you grieving right now? How are you mourning right now? Is there a stage of grief that arises in this moment? I'm going to flip back to those. Any one of these that stands out to you? And let me get back to that. So here is an area that we can explore, the loss of our assumptive world. I have the resources at the end, but one source that is pertinent to our area is this book, We Know How This Ends. Kathy Werzer, Bruce Kramer put this together, and it's a fantastic resource. Here's a quote that she has in there, and I think it's worth just reading. Most of us live our lives according to an unspoken set of assumptions. We assume, for instance, that we'll make good money, live in good health, enjoy good friends, good sex, a good time before dealing with the end game when it comes. Of course, that is a gross oversimplification, but you get the idea. Many of us assume our loved ones will also enjoy robust health and well-being. We experience a rude awakening when those assumptions are turned upside down and inside out. When that happens, some of us leap into a frenzied drive to make things right, to fix the problem. So when we look at the assumptive world, think of this definition: the assumptions or beliefs that ground, secure, or orient people, that give a sense of reality, meaning, or purpose in life. There's some other quotes. I'm not going to read everything I have on the slides, but you can see, this is what we assume about the world. This is the way things are, or at least the way things should be. And we're going to see in a bit, there's a bit of a difference there between the way things are and the way things should be once something upsets our assumptive world. Parker Palmer, in his book, A Hidden Wholeness, describes something called the tragic gap. And this is a model I use frequently for patients as well as myself. And this to me really illustrates it, the difference between what is and what should be. I should be outside, but I'm here inside. I should be losing weight, but I'm gaining weight. I should be playing with my kids, but instead I'm working. Take that to your experience. I should be living much longer, but this diagnosis came up. When we get stuck in between, he calls this the tragic gap, and he talks about the practice of finding a third way out. There's walls on both sides there. You can't really go back to the way things were, and it can't really get to the way things should be. You're stuck in between, and there's a way to maybe transform that into a third way out. So it's a great model, and I think it speaks well of the assumptive world and how that could get upset. So another pause point, if you want to pause and look at these questions: what did your assumptive world look like prior to your diagnosis? And then let's get the essence of what is right now. If you're on one side or the other, what is the what is? And then what should be? What do you think should be happening? What ought to be happening right now in your life? If this were a different year, a different time without the diagnosis, what should be happening? And finally, is there room for both? So you can pause the video, we'll pause the recording. We'll resume and see where it goes. It's going to go to another model of anticipatory grief. This one is one that I think of deeply for ALS and other diseases where you can kind of predict, here's what might happen in the future, and we are here to watch it happen. So here's a definition: it's a response to awareness of a life-threatening or terminal illness in oneself or a significant other, and the recognition of associated losses. So you can read there, basically when there's going to be a loss, but it hasn't happened yet. And you can see this is a terminal illness. There's time to prepare. This source, Sabrina Scali's presentation, Anticipatory Grief in ALS Families, talks about that difference with bereavement, that there is a beginning and there's an ending to anticipatory grief. The end being, when the thing happens. We're no longer anticipating it, it's here. And the most broad example would be, anticipating yours or someone else's death, and then death occurs. We move to bereavement then. But anticipatory grief is a pretty broad topic, and there's a lot that can influence that. When you look down this list, which I'm not going to read out loud, you can get the sense that these factors would influence, how heavy is that loss going to feel, and how much are you anticipating it? I'm zoning in on caregivers, first word that popped out on the screen. And I zoned in on that because, that could be something where if you've been in that role before, maybe you're thinking, oh, here we go again. I just did this for so-and-so and here it comes again. Or you've never been in a caregiving role and you may not have any anticipatory grief for that because you haven't experienced it yet. All of these factors shape subjectively how we can have anticipatory grief for all these different pieces in here. So as you look through that list, maybe you resonate with some or others in there. So we're putting anticipatory grief on the side there. We're going to get to ambiguous loss. And here's some definitions of ambiguous, this nice fancy word: doubtful or uncertain, inexplicable, maybe has more than one meaning or sense. You can get an idea of the definition there. Ambiguous loss has an interesting history here, and I think it's tied to anticipatory grief. I'm jumping ahead in my presentation, but they are linked. They're linked together because they can be both end. Ambiguous loss can be anticipatory, and we may not be able to quite put our finger on what are we losing? What exactly is the loss I'm feeling right now? How is it impacting me? General questions to think about as we look a little more at ambiguous loss. The roots of ambiguous loss come from the Vietnam War era with MIA soldiers. The person is missing. Are they dead? Are they alive? Are they coming back? We don't know. What exactly are we grieving? Is it a death? We don't, there's no way of knowing. This is where this ambiguous idea comes from. So this has to do with type 1. There are two types: when there's a physical absence with psychological presence. Some other examples: abductions or kidnapping. Someone goes missing. I think of catastrophic losses. I'll talk about 9/11 a little later, or natural disasters where scores of people are lost without really being able to find all of them. Zeroing in much more individually, a pregnancy loss, like a miscarriage where that baby's no longer there, but there's a presence perhaps for someone. That's an ambiguous loss. What are we mourning there? Divorce falls in that category too. So there's type 1. Type 2 is kind of the opposite in a sense. There's a psychological absence, but there's physical presence. Perhaps the most prevalent example would be dementia or some other mental illness where the person's there, they're there in the room, but not quite psychologically there. There's that absence, and it's already the loss of the person you knew. I will share in my work, when I work with people with end stage dementia or very advanced dementia, I so often hear, the person I loved is already gone. This is just a shell. That's the sense of ambiguous loss, that, yeah, they're there, but we've already lost so much of them. Or I've already said goodbye to so-and-so or some piece about them. So that's an important piece of this. Altered states of consciousness are in the same realm. Estranged family. Divorce could be this way too. If you're living under the same roof, but you're just not really together. So two types of ambiguous loss there. I'm going to go a little further into it. Oh, where did I go? I went too far. This is where the two meet. Ambiguous loss and anticipatory grief. And where the two types meet as well. Like I said, what has been lost? There's something of uncertain, obscure, inexplicable. What is lost? What is hoped for? What is hoped for now? And we just talked about this with that comment in the chat. We were hoping for this, and now maybe our hope is shifting to something else. Is closure resolution possible? So I got a little photo there because it's a good example for me. It's my cousin Jenny. Jenny was on the floor of Cantor Fitzgerald at the World Trade Center when the airplane hit. And for a long time in our family, she was listed as M for missing, and just like MIA. I was 14 at the time, and I didn't really know how to grieve, didn't know what to do. It was very ambiguous for me. Is she dead? Are we mourning a death? Is she another victim? Is she coming home? Is she in a hospital somewhere? Months later, they found a remnant of her at the Fresh Kills landfill. And, there was a little bit of closure there. But that's a personal example of that anticipatory grief when you're not really sure. You're waiting for something and kind of the inevitable as you navigate ambiguous loss and anticipating more and more the reality. So we all have those examples perhaps, and we'll have some time to spend with those. I want to add a little more into our little oven here, and then we can see what comes out on the other side. Layers of loss, and these are important to bring up now because they might help our discussion in a bit. Some would call them secondary losses, but I put that in quotes because I'm not convinced they're always secondary. We just talked about this. We were supposed to retire and grow old together. What happens when there's a loss of that dream, a loss of, or an alteration of role from provider to being the one being provided for? You're a spouse and now you're a caregiver. There's so many examples: independence, mobility, identity. And like I said, these aren't always secondary. Each loss is subjective. They can be ambiguous too. You're not really sure where it hurts or what the loss is. Two things I had a lot in my work: the keys to the car and to the house. One person might love to give up those car keys. They hated driving anyway. Please take the keys. Another person, I just had a hospice patient actually, and I might talk about them a bit too. It was the thing he held on to with almost, no pun intended, a death grip. And the last thing I want to do is drive. I'd rather just drive and then get into the garage and just go to sleep right there. So these losses are different, and to say that it might be really impactful for you, maybe not someone else. So it goes back and forth like that. And I'm just looking to where I had questions there. So let's get to the questions. Before that, here's one thing: why does it matter? And it's a little caveat that when we aren't sure, when we don't spend time with it, when we don't sit down next to it and say, where does this hurt me? It can really make things difficult, prevents resolution, it freezes the grief process. In a sense, we kind of need to know what we're grieving. So this whole realm of anticipatory grief and ambiguous loss, every time we can identify this hurts. It may not seem significant to you, but it's significant to me, and it's hurting me. That helps us grieve, and that helps us transform. So leaving this up here for a bit for those sources, the next thing is the question slide, and we can pause our video there to look at these questions. What losses are you grieving right now? Is there something you can't quite put your finger on? And another important one is, you lost something previously that informs your experience. You have weathered the storm of a loss already. You've said goodbye to someone you love. And now as you prepare to do it again, is there a piece of wisdom you learned from that experience? So we can pause here if you're watching, or pause. Let's resume.
Recording in progress.
And I want to get to kind of the pinnacle. Meaning making was that sixth stage of grief that we talked about in the very beginning. And here it is again: meaning making, or making sense. This is a great quote. Loss wasn't, mustn't, couldn't be an end in itself. It had to mean something. But finding out its meaning was like scaling a gigantic wall. Was it there just so I could get over it? And another one: the goal for families is to find some way to change, even though the ambiguity remains. This is yet another paradox: to transform a situation that won't change. This is any of the models we talked about: Parker Palmer's tragic gap, or talking about resilience, or compassion fatigue, or just grief work in general. The idea of transformation, another writer I know calls it metabolizing the grief. That it's not going to come out sideways in anger, but that we just chew and ruminate on it and transform it into something else, like love or some other positive thing. This is the difficult work, and I think we all know it is difficult work, very difficult work. So I'm reading through a comment right now, and I think this is another great example of something that's really important to you. You know, this is very, very acutely something meaningful for you, maybe not for everyone else, but this is a loss that you're feeling, and you know where it hurts you, and anticipating what might be coming next. So thank you for that. Thanks for sharing that.
We do hear regularly from folks who can't swallow anymore, just the loss of feeling connected in family gatherings and going out to meals. You know, we really do. Yeah, and food doesn't taste good anymore. It is such a gathering thing. We do gather around food, and holidays are around food, and that's just a significant loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And for someone else, you know, well, I love food, so I'm getting carried away here. It could be a different sense, like touch, you know, getting your hands in there and making the dough. And if you lose that ability, maybe you could still taste the bread, but you can't make it. You know, this is so subjective for each person. So another way to summarize this, it's not the situation that changes, but what they hope for. You know, and a really dark and stark example, I think, of Viktor Frankl, who in Man's Search for Meaning talks about this, that we cannot change the circumstances, but we change how we respond to them. Another way to say exactly this, that the circumstances are here, and the meaning making, the making sense out of the grief, out of the loss, that's the transformation that happens. And I would be curious mostly to hear about your experiences with that. So here's a junction point, and I think I'm going to make some decisions. We have 12 minutes left, and I have 2 4-minute videos. So I'm going to do one and not the other. I'm going to do this one because this is Bruce Kramer and Kathy Wurzer talking about this, and it's just a gem, especially for him being from at least the region I identify with in Minnesota. So stand by while I skip over to this.
And for those who don't know, he did have ALS.
Yes, and I think they do. Yeah, I hope they talk about it. Kathy will talk. I'm just looking to make sure. Let me know if you can't hear this.
You recognize me?
With ALS, it's not like you wake up one morning
Okay.
and it's gone. It's a little bit on a little bit on a little bit.
What was your life like before ALS?
It was a good life. I was very successful. I had been at a university for about 15 years and kind of worked my way up. Started as an assistant professor. And at the time, I was dean of a college. Was very active. Ev and I traveled extensively. We had 2 wonderful sons, and we could see that their lives were going to come together. And it was just a very nice life. I thought I was blessed.
ALS, amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, is a disease where the motor neurons that communicate with the muscles in the body die off and disconnect, and the muscles atrophy, all the muscles, including those that help you breathe. This is a very challenging disease, and one of the many challenges is that those with it have feeling, they just can't move. And despite this physical disconnection, Bruce actually is becoming more deeply connected, which is really what this book is all about.
When I was first diagnosed, I was afraid that I would lose all connections, not with my body, but with the people that I love. Then the physical connections that I knew were going to be lost. But what that also motivated me to do was to begin reaching out, maybe in ways that I had feared to reach out before as an able-bodied person, as a person unaware of the disease that I was carrying. And as I began to reach out, I found out that I was connecting with people. I would tell them about my illness, my ALS, and then I would just sit back and their stories would pour forth. And the privilege of being a part of their lives, because I had opened up a little bit of my life to them, was stunning. And so in this time, one of the great gifts has been the connections that I have made. I feel closer to my family. I feel closer to my friends. And I actually feel like I have become much more of a human than I was before ALS. The fact that none of us can predict when we're going to die. We think we have an idea. And most of us are in, it's not the kind of thing we think about every day. But having that with me allows me to really appreciate what it means to live fully. And so in writing the book and in writing my blog, what I've tried to do is to help people to see that if you just change your approach a little bit, your attitude a little bit, maybe engage a little bit more with your life, with your loved ones, life takes on a more beautiful meaning and it's much more enjoyable.
Thank you for taking the time with that. And just a little moment here to ask, what stood out for you in that video, if anything? And oh, we didn't get the recording. Okay. Okay, let me see here. I'm looking at a comment with diagnosis. I felt so much love and compassion from family and friends, so much appreciation for the life we have. And to reiterate a bit, with the recording on, there's something there that makes us human, for connection. When we go back, the fear of a loss of connection, which is isolation. Having that connection is so important and so deep. So thank you for sharing that. Ira Byock talks a bit about this with the 4 things that matter most. Please forgive me. I forgive you. Thank you. And I love you. 4 statements that hone in on those connections, and not just who we are, but who we are to each other. So we won't watch the video, but you can copy and watch. If you're watching the recording, watch it on your own time. The 4 minutes out of the 7-minute video is what you need. And it's a really good note there. I want to leave a little bit of time, so I'm going to skip to the end with this blessing to come home to yourself. And I give each of you watching this. May all that is unforgiven in you be released. May your fears yield their deepest tranquilities. May all that is unlived in you blossom into a future graced with love. And with those words, I hope that all your grieving and all of the loss that you're experiencing, know that it will blossom in the future with love. Sources are here. This book, which was just with the video as well, and other sources are here. And we have a few more minutes for final discussions and questions or comments or anything else you want to share today. Thank you for your time.